Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Yan Dai. I'm also go by Diane. I'm a PhD student majoring in educational psychology at Auburn University. Today is really my privilege and a great honor to invite Dr. Glennon to give us an interview. Dr. Glennon is the associate professor from the College of Education at Auburn University. Hi, Dr. Glennon.
Good morning. It's
Good
nice to meet
morning.
you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you too. Dr. Glennon is going to talk about her research career and give some suggestions for graduate students. In our interview, we're going to cover the following questions. We're going to start from the first question. Dr. Glennon, would you like to tell us a little bit about your history with the studying and self-regulated learning, and how did you get involved, and what have you contributed over the years? Please.
Of course. Thank you. So my very first studying and self-regulated learning SIG meeting was at AERA way back in 1995, and it was in San Francisco.
Yep.
And I found it listed in the program, but it's kind of a funny story. I was a graduate student and I wasn't honestly sure if I could go because I wasn't a part of it yet. So I literally called one of my professors who was also in San Francisco and asked if I was allowed to go. And she encouraged me to go, thank goodness. And I will say I was greeted with the most warm, welcoming, supportive individuals. I remember Claire Ellen Weinstein, Paul Pintrich, Barry Zimmerman, I think Paul Shutt, and the list goes on. And so it was really an honor, I feel, to be in a room with the people that I was kind of studying and reading about all the time. So to be honest, I was a little starstruck, I would have to say, but they were all so nice and kind and helpful and welcoming, even though, you know, some of us were graduate students. And I felt like they really wanted to share their love of self-regulated learning with everyone. And I feel like that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
So to answer the second part of your question, I feel like because of that, and I feel like we still try to promote that, when I'm at AERA, the SIG is kind of my home away from home. And so I tried to get a little more involved, and I've served as a proposal reviewer for a while, and then I served as program chair twice, and then I'm currently serving as the SIG chair. And then in 2012, I started the first SIG dinner for our SIG in Vancouver, British Columbia, which honestly, I can't take complete credit for. I got the idea from the Motivation SIG, but I tried to apply it to our SIG, and I feel like that's something I want to keep going as well.
And our second question is, how would you describe your research interest in general? And what were some of the influences on your research? And how did your research interest evolve over time?
Sure, that's a great question. I'm actually going to answer that question backwards. So here's kind of how I got interested in this general area. And again, it's kind of a funny story, but my best friend in middle school was one of those people who never cracked a book, never had to study, but at the same time, she never got below a 98 either on anything ever. And I did well, but I definitely had to study. So I feel like I became very interested in studying and learning personally, but still in the back of my mind, I always kind of wondered, how do other people learn differently from me?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's always been a question. And I think that kind of encouraged me to find this area. And so I discovered self-regulated learning one Friday night in Petit Library at Penn State when I was a graduate student. And I found the 1990 special issue of The Educational Psychologist, and it was a feature entire journal all on self-regulated learning. And at that time, I'm dating myself, but you had to use Change to copy pages. It was much harder in a way than it was now. And I literally had to take all my cash and convert it to dimes. And I made copies of every page of that article. And I walked out, of that journal, every article in the journal. And I walked out of there with a stack of copies of the entire journal. And I just really started reading it. And I was so excited about this area of research. And I kind of had an aha moment, and I was like, this is it. This is the body of research that really answers my research questions. And this is what I really want to study. And I was very interested in kind of college students learning and self-regulated learning. And of course, that also encompasses motivation. And that's an area that I'm really still pursuing to some degree. So I feel very fortunate to have found an area of research that I could just really embrace and love and be passionate about for, a very long time.
Yeah, it's really very impressive. And our next question is, can you please tell us what makes you excited about your work?
Yeah, I guess I love that research kind of allows us to pursue our passions and answer our questions. And I think that's why I embrace self-regulated learning. And kind of a similar example, I recently became interested in the effects of the COVID-19 global pandemic on college students, which I'll talk, it kind of segues into my research, but on college students and how that impacts their motivation and their self-regulated learning and learning strategies, metacognition, and ultimately how that affects their, GPA and academic performance and achievement. And I just think it's really, I love the research process and that it can help you to really uncover some, I don't know if I want to say answers, but some data that really kind of helps you to answer some of your questions. And I really appreciate that about that. About research.
Then would you please describe some of your past and current research and also let us know about your future research goals, please?
Of course. So I would say my past research, I would say focus more on research environments. And what I mean by that, I have looked at the effects of more learner-centered approaches on the learning process. And I've tried to engage learners through different studies in more learner-centered approaches, such as problem-based learning, case-based learning, cooperative learning, learning communities, conceptual change teaching and learning, experiential learning, service learning. I've done research on all of those. But then to segue into my current research has looked at the role of self-regulated learning, but to focus more broadly on the social context. So I've more recently tried to look at the effects of peer and parental relationships, which on college students' motivation, and then how this motivation affects their cognitive and metacognitive learning strategies, and ultimately their academic outcomes. But then to kind of bring it all together, more recently, and I had already started doing that research, but more recently with you and our research team, I kind of decided it was important to look at those relationship issues, the effects of social relationships during the COVID-19 global pandemic. And so specifically what we found so far in our research is during the COVID-19 lockdown, when everyone was literally sent home from the universities and living with their families or guardians or whomever, certainly what we found was the parental relationships were very important to motivation during that time. But then we looked at the similar constructs only a year later when our college students were allowed to be back on campus. And perhaps not surprisingly, when they were allowed to return to campus, the peer relationships affected their motivation, which then affected their cognitive and metacognitive learning strategies. And so I think overall, in the midst of this pandemic, we definitely found some support for the effects of social relationships on motivation, which of course impacted cognitive and metacognitive learning strategies as well. So I guess future goals. So building on the prior research, in our research study, personally, we have not yet looked at some sociocultural factors, the effects of the COVID-19 global pandemic on more marginalized populations. And we're planning to look at the effects of the pandemic on stress, depression, anxiety, more psychological factors. And so that's kind of where we're, I guess, moving. That's the direction in which we're moving with regards to our research.
Yeah, that makes sense. And our next question is, I know you really enjoy your research. And would you please tell us which part specifically you really enjoy and describe some of the challenges you encounter in the
Of
research
course.
process?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of said this, but it's kind of, I find it very exciting when we find support for research-driven hypotheses.
Uh-huh.
Some of you and some of my graduate students know, I love
Yeah.
writing reviews of the literature.
Yes.
I love synthesizing literature, but then I think it's really exciting when you find gaps in the literature and then your own research kind of supports those gaps and further elucidates the existing research. So I guess I will say, again, I'm talking about the COVID-19 research because that's what we're doing now, but it's really been fascinating to watch that unfold. It's been pretty horrific, but watching the whole pandemic unfold and the effects on college students has been really interesting.
Yeah.
And, it's just opened up avenues. Like we hadn't planned on looking at the psychological effects so much, but we're realizing we have to look at that. So I guess I think the second question was the challenges along the way. I think the biggest challenges in research are time. And what I mean by that is I feel like it takes a long time or a lot of time and dedication to really complete good quality research. By the time you go through the design process, hypotheses, research questions, the IRB process, data collection, data analyses, it just takes a lot of time to do good quality research, but I personally feel like it's worth it. And we have been collecting data now for like almost a year and a half.
Right.
And we have a good number of participants at this point, but it's a long process. So I think sometimes that can be the challenge, but I do think it's worth it. And I think people don't realize how much time quality research really takes.
Yeah, it's time consuming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now let's talk about your career. What do you enjoy about your career in general? And can you tell us about your future career goal in general, please?
Sure. I mean, personally, I feel very fortunate. I think that this is the perfect career for me. Honestly, I love teaching, but I do love research as well, and service, it's kind of all of it. But eventually, I might consider doing administration, but not necessarily department head, but something a little broader. Like I was fortunate to be in an honors college when I was an undergraduate. So I wouldn't mind being like a director of an honors college or something like that. That's slightly different from academia, but you're still at a college or university setting, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
And I would still conduct research and I don't know, maybe teach on occasion, but I think I eventually want to do administration, but maybe not department head, something slightly different at the college or university level.
Well, that might benefit more students.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way. Maybe.
And would you like to give us some advice, give advice to the graduate students? That can be any general advice or some tips, please.
Of course, that's a good question as well. So one of my former colleagues here at Auburn, who is now a dean, he's moved on, he's a dean at a different university. But he said to me once, align yourself with the profession and you can never go wrong. And I think what he meant by that is it's really easy to get caught up with a lot of department stuff, which of course we have to do. But I feel like sometimes faculty lose sight of the profession. Like I was talking to someone recently, not here, but it's a friend from grad school, but at a different university, and they have a little more of an administrative position. But they also said to me recently that they don't have any time to go to conferences or do anything on a national level. And I feel like I kind of want to stay connected to that. So I think that was one bit of good advice. And I've shared this with you before, but I have a quote on my wall in my office, and it just says, working hard for something you don't care about is called stress, but working hard for something that you love is called passion.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's an important distinction. And I know these sound very cliche, but I would say to find something that you are passionate about.
Yeah.
I literally tell my students that you're going to be married to this dissertation for possibly years. So you really need to find something that you love.
Yeah.
And this is a true story too, but I had a graduate student several years ago, and she came and met with me, and she was writing all these lit reviews about motivation, and it was just a struggle. And one day I just sat her down. I said, you don't really love this, do you? And she was like, what do you mean? And I said, I feel like you're writing these theories and editing and cutting and pasting and writing these theories, but you don't really love it. And she was like, well, I don't know. And I said, honestly, I think you need to find something you love to write this dissertation about. And she started crying, and she said, I mean, I cannot start over. There's no way. I've come too far. And I was like, I don't know that I'm suggesting that you start over, but I said, what is it that you love? And she said, I love going out into schools and helping students to grow gardens. And then I said, what do you do with your job? She had a day job. And she said, we go out to schools and we help students grow gardens, and we study their fruit and vegetable consumption. And she's like, this really impacts people's lives. And I really like that. And I said, why don't you write your dissertation on that? And I don't know, it's like it never occurred to her. And she's like, could I do that? And I said, of course you could do that. And when she was talking, I said, you're so passionate about this, and this is what you know and love. These are the best dissertations. Well, and I will say, fast forward probably 15 years, maybe 10 years. She published her dissertation, and it is now the most highly published dissertation I have ever had the privilege to serve on as a committee. And it's because she found what she loved, and that would be my advice. And then I guess adding to that, I would say always start with some good theory to drive your research. I tell my students I could get a full-time job writing lit reviews, and my students think I'm crazy, but I really do like that.
You're so strong at that. Well, I can tell.
Well, we're always working on it, right? But I think that's really good advice. Start with some good theory-driven research, but also start with your passion and what you know and love. And then I guess my final kind of advice would be, I don't know, did you have a question that said this? I probably am rambling too long, but I would say
we love your suggestion. Those are really very useful for us, please.
Okay, thank you. I would say don't ignore the value of good, healthy social relationships, and always work to maintain a healthy work-life balance. And what I mean by that is, when I came here from graduate school, obviously I didn't know anyone in the state of Alabama. And so I would have never predicted this, but the people that I started writing with when I was on the tenure track were my friends from graduate school. And we were now all over the country at different institutions, but these were the people that I started writing with. And if you had told me in graduate school in 5 years, these are going to be the people you're writing with, I don't think I would have predicted that, because we were all kind of doing our own research, but then we started writing together because we were all on the tenure track. And then gradually I got to know professors at Auburn, and I started writing with them. But it takes time, but I feel like at the end of the day, it's your relationships that are going to sustain you through the profession. And just make sure we nurture these, because it's so hard to get caught up in our work. I've definitely done it this semester. It's taken so much time, but don't lose sight of our relationships, because that's kind of the why we do this as well. So I think that's important.
Yeah, that's truly important. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Glennon. And my personally, I feel like it's very inspiring and it's very useful. And our audience, the graduate students, hope that will be useful for you too. And thanks for your attention.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.